I always knew I didn't want bedtime stories to fade out once JD was reading independently. I knew the benefits, and I hoped he never pushed back on reading together. But over the past year, that's exactly what happened. You see, in September, after he completely bombed his beginning of grade reading test, I knew something had to change. Over the last year, our read aloud time had shifted towards more independent and shared reading. I'll admit it, we were busy juggling Hunter's sleep struggles, and he was demanding more of our attention. I kept telling myself that it was just a phase and that I'd be back to reading with JD more consistently in no time. But that wasn't exactly what happened, and it definitely didn't happen as soon as I'd hoped. By the time we got things straightened out with Hunter, JD'd been complaining for months that reading was boring, that he hated it. With the end of the school year craziness and summer, I let it go. I kept hoping that if I took the pressure off, he'd suddenly come around on his own, even though deep down, I should have known better. The wait and see approach rarely works out, and after seeing those test results, I knew two things had to change, and fast. One, I couldn't let our reading time slide anymore. And two, I needed to try a different approach. So I took the reins again. I started picking stories that were more engaging and challenging, and I didn't take no for an answer. I had two rules. One, he had to at least give every book I read a fair shot for at least a few chapters before he could veto it. And two, he had to be in the room when I read, no exceptions. Now, I didn't force him to sit next to me at first, but I made sure he was present, and instead of pressuring him to read, I just read to him. I didn't have any expectations, I didn't push. I wanted to keep it as an opportunity for him to get lost in the story and actually enjoy it. And guess what? It worked. Not only has his attitude towards reading improved, but I love our reading time together. I'm just as invested in these stories as he is, and it's become something we both genuinely look forward to. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Just because your kid can read on their own doesn't mean read aloud time has to stop. And if I've learned anything from the past year, it's that letting it slip too much can backfire big time. I don't want you to end up where we did, with a kid who used to love books suddenly pushing them away. That's why in this episode, I want to help you keep read alouds going strong so your kiddo doesn't start to dread reading like mine did. Or worse, backslide after all the progress that they've made. In fact, this stage can be one of the most rewarding. You can bond over stories, help them tackle trickier texts, and explore new genres together. So today we're going to talk about why read-alouds matter, what makes them so powerful, how to keep them going as kids get older, and how to make sure this time together strengthens their love of reading instead of taking away their independence. All right, let's get into it. Reading aloud isn't just about books, it's about connection. Sharing a story creates a moment of togetherness, a chance to slow down and be present with each other in a way that's rare in our busy lives. It doesn't have to be a big elaborate thing. It can be as simple as a few pages before bed or a quiet moment on the couch after school. The important part is that it's a shared experience, one that keeps communication open. As kids grow, they start carving out more independence, which can sometimes make it harder to stay connected. And let's be honest, the preteen and teen years are coming. I might not have a teenager yet, but we've all been one at some point, so I know what's ahead. Those years where eye rolls replace full sentences, where fine is the answer to everything, and where getting them to open up about their day feels like the Grand Inquisition. Right now, reading together is a built-in moment of connection, but as kids get older, they naturally start pulling away a bit. Not because they don't love you, but because that's just part of growing up. Keeping the habit of reading together gives you a reason to check in, to share something beyond the usual, how was your day? And to create a space where they still feel comfortable talking. In our home, bedtime stories aren't just a routine, they're a must, especially after the events of this past summer. On the rare nights we skip or cut it short because of a late evening, guess who's sneaking into our room in the middle of the night for a cuddle, a quick chat, or to be tucked back in after a bad dream? And don't let it fool you, yes, even the older one still has his moments. In fact, some of my best childhood memories are tied to bedtime stories with my dad. He worked long hours, so our time together during the week was limited. But bedtime? That was our thing. Even when I first started hating reading on my own, I still loved getting lost in a good story with him. Kids might not always say it out loud, but they cherish this time with you, even as they get older. And the best part, it's something they'll remember long after childhood. Take me and my dad, for instance. Reading aloud isn't just about the words on the page. It's about how those words come to life. When you read out loud, you're showing them what fluent reading sounds like, how sentences flow, how punctuation shapes the rhythm, and how to bring different tones and emotions into a story. And guess what? They're watching and listening. Even if they don't mimic it right away, they're picking up on how you navigate tricky words and unfamiliar phrases, and that builds confidence for when they read on their own. It's not just reading skills. They're soaking up the way we use language in everyday life, too. It gets us every time one of the boys casually drops some grown-up sounding phrase into conversation like they're a little adult. The other day, Hunter was talking to JD in the other room. I'm still not exactly sure what he was talking about, but I heard him say to JD, "It's the worst that could happen." And I had to stop myself from laughing because that sounded just like me. It's one of my go-to phrases for when the kids are pushing back on trying something new. And JD, he's been throwing technically before correcting us on something, which I think came from a book, but then again, it wouldn't surprise me if he picked it up from me. This is exactly what happens with reading too. When kids hear words in context, they start using them without even realizing they've learned something new. You might notice little things. Maybe they start pausing at commas when they read aloud, or they put more emphasis into their sentences instead of reading in a monotone. Even if they're not performing their reading, you'll hear those tiny changes that show that they're picking up fluency cues just from hearing you do it. I don't know about you, but I get tongue-tied all the time when reading with my boys. I'll skip a word, mix up a sentence, or completely butcher a name or a word. But you know what? That's actually great for them to see. They get to watch me correct myself, laugh it off, and keep going, which teaches them that reading doesn't have to be perfect. And sometimes, the best way to shake off those little mistakes is to just lean into the fun of it. Speaking of making reading fun, one of the easiest ways to bring stories to life is by adding a little personality to it. That's why adding character voices has become a big part of read aloud time in our house. My kids love it when we do the voices. I'm terrible at them, but they don't care. In fact, they think it's hilarious when I mess up. Meanwhile, my husband, he absolutely nails them. So now it's the ongoing family joke. Dad's the voice guy, and I'm just doing my best. But even in that, there's a lesson. Confidence isn't just about getting everything perfect. It's about showing up, having fun, and not taking yourself too seriously. Reading aloud also gives kids exposure to richer vocabulary and new genres they might not pick up on their own. Let's be real. Most kids aren't going to challenge themselves with harder books when they're reading independently. They'll stick with what's comfortable, which makes sense. But when you read aloud together, they get to hear more complex language in a way that feels natural, not forced. Hearing unfamiliar words in context helps them absorb new vocabulary without even realizing it's happening. It's like learning through osmosis. They hear it, they understand it, and next thing you know, they're using that word in conversation. Have you ever noticed how your kid randomly busts out a big word and you're like, where did you even learn that? 9 times out of 10, it's because they heard it somewhere first. That's exactly what's happening with books. When they hear words in context, especially tricky ones that they wouldn't choose to read themselves, it sticks. And the best part, they don't even realize they're learning. And another thing, reading together is a great way to introduce them to different genres. If they've been stuck in a reading rut, reaching for the same types of books over and over, this is your chance to shake things up. That's exactly what happened with JD. When he was younger, he loved nonfiction books about dinosaurs. But those weren't exactly great for bedtime. We wanted to transition him to early chapter books, so we found the Dragon Master series. Dinosaurs, dragons, close enough, right? And guess what? It worked. He devoured the entire series. He even reread several of the books on his own before the next one came out. That excitement was exactly what I was hoping to spark again this past fall after he'd been pushing back on reading. All right, and now I want to talk about one of the biggest benefits of reading aloud. It naturally leads to conversation. Whether it's about a tricky word, a confusing plot twist, or some random historical fact that sends them down a rabbit hole of questions, it's these moments that deepen their understanding in a way that silent reading doesn't. When kids read on their own, they might skip over something they don't understand. But when you're reading together, it's natural to pause and talk about what's happening, to explain things, ask questions, or just wonder out aloud. And trust me, kids have questions. JD's notorious for asking some of the most out-of-the-blue questions that somehow always connect back to what we're reading. For example, we recently read I Survived the Bombing of Pearl Harbor, 1941. There was a part towards the end that mentioned a B-17 pilot. JD stopped me and asked, were the B-17s the planes that dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in retaliation for Pearl Harbor? First of all, for him to ask a question like that, I was dumbfounded. I didn't even know he knew about the bombs, or Hiroshima, or Nagasaki, or that he could even pronounce those. They were not mentioned in the book, by the way. Bottom line, I had no idea. Luckily, my husband, who's both a history buff and an aviation enthusiast, jumped right in and gave JD a full breakdown of how different planes were used in World War II. That one question turned into a whole learning moment, giving him more context than I could ever dream of for the story that we were reading. And keep in mind, we were basically at the end of the story at this point. That's the power of reading aloud. It creates a space where kids feel safe to ask questions and engage with what they're learning without the fear of getting it wrong. That's especially important for reluctant readers. If they're struggling, they might not ask for help. They don't want to feel embarrassed or singled out, especially in a classroom setting. But when they're reading with you, they can ask anything. No pressure, no judgment. And guess what? Those little conversations help strengthen their comprehension skills without it feeling like work. When reading aloud stays part of your family routine, it sends a clear message that books matter here. Reading isn't just something you have to do. It's something you get to do, like watching a movie or playing a game together. And this is also a great time to introduce your kids to books that you loved as a child. We can't wait to read Sideways Stories from Wayside School with JD. He got it as a gift 2 Christmases ago, but at the time he wasn't really open to that level of chapter books. And honestly, he was starting to avoid books in general around that time. But now that he's doing better, I think he's finally ready. It's been a while since we've enjoyed a family read aloud. We've learned that chapter books at bedtime don't work well for Hunter yet. His attention span just isn't there. So instead of forcing it, we're toying around with the idea of making it a before or after dinner routine, a few nights a week when he's more alert. I'll keep you posted on how that goes. Now keep in mind, it won't be a perfect 7-day-a-week habit, and that's okay. 3 nights is plenty, just enough to get him used to hearing the longer stories while we focus on books at his level at bedtime. Ah, the joys of early reading days. We are officially in the learning to read stage with Hunter, and I forgot just how much patience that really requires. If the idea of a family read aloud routine is new to your family, the key is to make it a warm and inviting experience. Pick a book that's just a tad above your child's reading level. If you have multiple kids, shoot for something that's somewhere in between if they aren't that far apart in age. Otherwise, go with something closest to the eldest level and maybe set the younger one or ones up with a nice quiet activity so they can still be in the room listening, but maybe not following along in the same way as everyone else. I promise it's still beneficial to them just hearing stories read aloud. Once you've made your book selection, grab some blankets, warm drinks, a snack or two, whatever makes it feel like a treat. As I'm recording this, it's freezing outside. So for us, that means hot tea for me, hot cocoa for the boys. Yep, my husband too. And all of us curled up on the couch together. Now, as the weather gets nicer, we'll probably move this to our screen porch, sip some lemonade, and enjoy a book outside. But here's the thing, the setting doesn't matter. Just go for an experience you can easily recreate. Keep it simple. If it takes too much effort, you won't stick with it. Find what works for your family and make it enjoyable for you too, not just the kids. Reading aloud isn't just about the stories. It's about the experience, whether it's through silly voices, shared laughter, or getting lost in a great book together. It's one of those little things that sticks with them long after their childhood. So keep the tradition alive, no matter how old they get. And if you ever need a reason to keep reading aloud, here it is. It builds confidence, strengthens their skills, sparks great conversations, and fosters a love of reading. It's not about taking away their independence. It's about keeping stories and connection at the heart of your family. I'd love to hear from you. What books have been a hit in your house, whether it's a shared read aloud or one your kid couldn't put down? Or if you brought back read aloud time with an independent reader, what changes have you noticed? I'd love for you to DM me over on Instagram at Engaging Reluctant Readers, all one word, and let me know. I'd really love to have a chat. If you feel like your kid's ready to quit even before the story gets going, or they tap out after just a few pages, you're not alone. Next week, I'm tackling a common challenge, reading stamina. What it is, why it matters, and how to help your child stick with books longer without turning reading into a chore. I've got practical tips and creative strategies to help them stay engaged and build their reading endurance without the pushback. Catch you next time, and until then, happy reading.